Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Starr, and welcome to another episode of Manspeak. Manspeak is an offshoot to our Heart Warrior series, where some of our Heart Warriors come back and talk for a whole nother episode on a subject that they choose, a subject particularly close to their heart. They're embodied in, full of wisdom, and able to teach and give insight in. Today, I am thrilled and honoured to have the return of our number 31 Heart Warrior, and that is Frederick Marx. Now, Frederick is an award-winning filmmaker, a best-selling author, a facilitator for the Mankind Project, rising visionary, and very passionate about rites of passage and initiation for boys growing into men. And in fact, that is the subject of today. So really excited to be digging deeper into this subject and understanding the importance and what's happening now in society that it hasn't been given the importance that it deserves. So thank you for being here and enjoy. Frederick Marx, our number 31 Heart Warrior. So happy to have you back here. Thank you.
My pleasure. Great to see you.
Oh, good to see you again. And I was reading that article that you sent through to me about shootings in America, and it said that you were Oscar-nominated film maker. So tell us a bit more about that, please.
Well, we're coming up almost on the 30-year anniversary of that when I went to the Academy Awards. But yes, not quite. It was in February of 1995, but I was nominated in the Best Editing category for our film Hoop Dreams. And frankly, it was a big scandal in this country that we were not nominated in the Best Documentary category. So it was actually headlines on the Chicago newspapers and also major front page stories on a lot of newspapers around the country that we were not nominated for Best Documentary. But anyway, yeah, it seems like ancient history to me now, but I had big success with that film. And in fact, the offshoot of that film, we made a half-hour version of it called Higher Goals, which was actually designed to be a kind of a stay-in-school version of Hoop Dreams, basically for school kids. And that film got nominated for an Emmy Award, which is our national television honors. So when we got nominated for that, that was a year before the Academy Awards. That's when I went out and bought my tuxedo, because I thought, if they like the stay in school version, they're going to love the long version.
Wow.
So I went out and bought a used tuxedo.
Well, it was all setting you up for the years to come, because now, all these years later, you've made some amazing films, and we touched on that in our Heart Warrior conversation. But what the subject you've chosen for today is men's rites of passage and initiation. So why is that important, and what's happening in society that it hasn't been given the priority that it needs?
Because we've forgotten, we've forgotten. And it's this big collective forgetting that the dominant culture has experienced, I'm afraid, that somehow, just because of the last 200-300 years of modern industrial civilization, we've forgotten all of the rites and rituals that were really commonplace around the planet, literally for thousands of years. There's an African proverb that says, if we do not initiate the young, they will burn down the village to feel the heat. And, look around. There's a lot of villages that are burning down because nobody is initiating and mentoring our teens. And I feel like this is a particularly acute problem with men. I was going to get into it a little more in my talk, but I think men really need mentorship and initiation more so than women, if for no other reason than without it, we're more dangerous.
Yeah. So please continue. I know you've got an idea in mind for this presentation, and I'd like to be able to offer you the maximum space and time to be able to get as much information in as possible. So where would you like to start?
Well, actually, I'd like to just start. I mean, you touched on my career as a filmmaker, and that's what I'm most known for. So I'd like to just sort of give a little bit of background there. Most of the folks who are watching this now, listening, can find me on Wikipedia. You can find me on IMDb, which stands for Internet Movie Database, and also our site, warriorfilms.org. But yes, I'm most known for this film. Hoop Dreams came out 30 years ago, and I've been making films for about 45 years now. And my company, Warrior Films, is a nonprofit company, or NGO, as it's referred to in most of the world. But I can't stand that term nonprofit, which is standard for our culture in the United States. I call us a social profit company, which is to say we make plenty of profit. We change human consciousness, the way people all over the world think and feel about very important subjects, but it's not easily measurable in dollars and cents. So, our mission statement, I think, says it all. Warrior Films inspires needed social change by telling compelling stories, highlighting transformational solutions. So that's what we do. We tell powerful emotional stories about overlooked and forgotten people in society, and we highlight the ways they're making transformational change in their lives. And most of our work, about 80% of it, we give away. The short films, the blogs, the public talks like this one. And we survive mostly through donations and by trying to monetize some of the longer films that we make. So if any of your listeners out there are at all called to want to join with us, we absolutely welcome your participation. We have room for all kinds of volunteer opportunities, as well as, of course, accepting donations. So my plan for today was to talk for, 30 to 45 minutes or so, and then to share some of the film clips that I've made over the years that address this subject of male initiation. If you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's work and his concept of the hero's journey, some of this is going to definitely sound familiar. And also, the work of Robert Moore, one of the writers of the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, talking about the archetypes. Also Robert Bly, I consider him one of my greatest teachers. And Carl Jung, right? The student of Freud, the great archetype philosopher, psychologist. So if you're comfortable, and now I'm just going to talk directly to your viewers, I want to start with a thought experiment. And if you're comfortable, I invite you to actually close your eyes for a minute. And imagine, if you will, a world in which all men and boys have a deep sense of purpose for their life, and they're connected to their deepest passions. Imagine how much happier men and boys would be to know their own physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional limits, so they don't have to seek them out through unconscious trials. And it also would make them less prey to addiction. Imagine a world where the ceremonies that we already regularly practice, like birthdays, weddings, funerals, and the like, are ritualized to deepen their impact and meaning. And imagine that all teens know the rights and responsibilities of adulthood and feel welcome and accepted by other adults in their communities as co-equals, while still appreciating the different level of respect that elders deserve. And imagine that they're actually stakeholders in community, deeply invested in a community that's thriving. And imagine that all parents know when it's their time to let their teens go forth on their own as co-equal adults to make their way in the world, and that those parents are culturally and institutionally supported in doing so. And imagine, too, if we had no more suspended adolescence, teenagers in disguise, running our countries, running our corporations, running our institutions. And now to even get into more specifics, imagine at every birthday party that each man and boy is tasked with naming the things that most challenged them in the last year and to state what lessons they learned from those challenges. That, to me, is a perfect example of what we can do very practically to deepen the meaning of the rituals and celebrations that we already practice. Imagine, for example, that every Memorial Day, every time we go out to the cemetery, we not only put flowers and flags on graves, but we invite all of our extended families to speak publicly to the grief of our losses. I personally feel like in some ways with the desperate times that we live in, there's almost nothing more important that we can do for and with each other than to grieve together. And imagine if every Valentine's Day we shared with our beloved all that we most treasure in them and speak those truths to their face. You know, some of this I realize sounds extremely utopian, but it's some of what is actually possible if we're willing as a whole planetary community to begin to take seriously this notion of initiation and mentorship of all of our kids, even though today I'm mostly going to be focusing on boys and men. So if you've had your eyes closed, that's fine. You can keep them closed or you can open them. But I want you now to consider, have you ever wondered what is the purpose of my life? What is it that I'm here for on this planet to actually do? And where do I fit in? What's my place in the world? And what's my place in the cosmos? And what is uniquely mine to offer, if anything? What are my gifts? And you know, it's interesting, Native Americans in this country use the term medicine. What is my medicine that is uniquely mine that I have to give and to share to my fellow human beings during my lifetime? How will I face my life's coming challenges? How will I get to be that man or woman that I've always wanted to be? And when will I be accepted and honored as an equal by my parents and other elders? Who or what helped me across that threshold of adolescence into adulthood? Or am I in fact still on that journey? So if you've had your eyes open, then please open them now. You know, it's bad enough when adults like us don't have answers to these questions. But the question that I ask myself is, where can young people, especially young men, get answers to these questions? Because I guarantee you all young people ask themselves these very questions. So that's what Rites of Passage and mentorship is designed to provide. It guides young people to answer these questions for themselves. What is their unique answer to each and every one of these questions? And since I'm really talking about human development over the course of an entire lifetime, you know, I invite you all to consider that Rites of Passage might well be the grand unifying field theory for human development, for human growth. So today, what I want to share with you, I want to download some of the key ideas and practices that have inspired and served me over the years. And, you know, I want to start off by saying, forgive me, quick drink. Why me? Why am I giving this talk? You know, as you just heard, you know, I'm a filmmaker by trade. So I think that's an absolutely legitimate answer that deserves a serious question that deserves a serious answer. So my interest with all of these issues started with what I consider to be my initiation into mature masculinity, which happened in October 1995, not far from Chicago, Illinois, in the United States, on a weekend workshop called the New Warrior Training Adventure. The group is called the Mankind Project. They're active throughout Australia. They're everywhere. So, but I'm not a PhD. I'm not a social scientist. I'm not a cultural anthropologist, a scholar. I'm not a medical doctor or a psychologist or a philosopher. I'm not a professional advisor or some kind of guru. By trade, I'm an artist. I'm a storyteller. And I tell stories primarily through films, occasionally actually through songs that I write, but increasingly through the writing of books. I now have 3 books that I've written and published. But I've also practiced and studied rites of passage, and I've made films about them for 25 years. So I've really immersed myself in a lot of this learning now for a long time. And I'm also a founder of an international NGO that's devoted to teen rites of passage. And it's called youthpassageways.org. And you can find it very, very quickly online. We started it in 2015. And you'll find many organizations around the world that are there, including the organization Boys to Men, which also has branches throughout Australia. My second book that I published, in fact, a lot of this talk that you'll be hearing today is written about in much more detail in my second book. It's called Rites to a Good Life, Everyday Rituals of Healing and Transformation. And in this book, I have a chapter on teens, which includes a conversation on what boys need that's both similar to and different from girls in the way of initiation and mentorship. So for further details and more in-depth explanations, you can just go to the book. You can find it on Amazon. You can also find audio versions of the book as well. So my life's goal, and this, believe me, I had no clue that this was going to be a major feature of my entire life when I was in my 20s and 30s. But my life's goal for the last 25 plus years has been every teen on the planet gets initiated and mentored into adulthood. Very simple and very grand. I get it. So let me just detour just for a minute and tell you about a little bit about my personal story and sort of what led me into this inquiry, into this interest around these issues. How do I become the man that I've always wanted to be? That's the question that I asked myself. And I asked myself that question very specifically when I was 9 years old, and I was on my way to the funeral for my father, who had died very unexpectedly of a heart attack. And here suddenly was his younger brother, my uncle, who was escorting us and the family to the funeral. And he put his hand on my shoulder as soon as we left the house, and he whispered to me, "Freddie, you're the man of the house now." And that was all he said. And you better believe that however dysfunctional we may feel like a statement like that is to a 9-year-old boy, and hopefully none of us will make the mistake of making a statement like that to a boy or a girl, that you're now the woman of the house. I took it very seriously. I wanted to be, in a sense, that husband to my own mother, to support her. I also wanted to be that father to my older sister and my younger brother. And what's really sad, though, is that my uncle didn't stick around to show me how to become that man that I always wanted to be. And so that question lived in me and has lived in me ever since. And in fact, to this day, now almost 60 years later, I still ask myself that question: how can I be the best man that I possibly can be? So that's a little bit about how I got here. So to the subject of rites of passage now, that was a term that was coined in 1909 by a writer by the name of Arnold van Gennep. He was a Dutch-speaking Belgian cross-cultural anthropologist. So what he did was he looked at indigenous peoples' practices of initiation the world over. He studied dozens of different cultures. And he asked himself, well, what is similar and what is different about all of these practices among all of these very, very different cultures. And then he boiled them down to their most basic universal components. Now, I'll get to those in just a second, what those components are. But first, let me define the term. So most simply, rites of passage can be defined as an intentional transformational shift from one phase of life to another. It could also be defined as the cultural ceremonies and rituals that are utilized to activate and or commemorate these life passages from one stage to another. So what Van Gennep described as rites of passage were really community-created, community-directed experiences that transmit cultural values and knowledge to individuals. So the rite of passage process not only guides the individual's transition to a new status, going from, let's say, adolescent to adult, but equally important, it creates public events that celebrate that transition and reaffirm the community values, which inform and guide the expectations for behaviors that are then essential for the group's survival. The historical record shows that rites of passage have been present in various forms, literally, again, in cultures for thousands of years, and they've remained an important part of community and cultural health promotion during all the major transitions in a given normal human lifespan, birth and marriage and death and everything in between. So I use rite of passage, that term, synonymously with initiation. So you'll hear me go back and forth, sometimes saying rite of passage, sometimes initiation, largely meaning exactly the same thing. And we have to understand that, you know, in our modern cultures today, in the so-called technological advanced North, well, I say the North, obviously Australia's in the South. The point I'm getting to is that just because we turn 18 or 21, we don't just instantly morph into adults. This doesn't happen just by having a birthday. You know, and those ages, they may constitute legal definitions, legal thresholds of gaining some of the rights of adulthood, but they don't guarantee that we're psychically and emotionally ready for this new stage of life. So just because we can drive a car, drink alcohol, vote, have sex, join the military, any of these things, it doesn't mean, again, that we're psychically and emotionally ready to live the life of an adult with all of those rights, yes, and responsibilities. So initiation and rites of passage can help guarantee that we're ready to move on to the next stage of our human development, our growth. And by the way, I tend to think of mentorship and initiation as two halves of one whole. Okay, both are required for boys to mature into mature masculinity, into their wholeness. And you could say that mentorship, in a sense, is required before, during, and after initiation. So it's really essential. It becomes kind of the through line, the continuity, if you will, that exists before, again, during, and after initiation or a key rite of passage. So actually, I'd like to pause right now. Partly, I just need a drink of water. But I want to share with you a short film that I made about boys becoming men. So let's see here. Do I have? Yes, I do. I have sharing capabilities. So let me get this up here. And let me know if you can hear it okay, Gemma, please.
I can hear it fine. Thank you.
I'd like to find that long lost map. The map that should have been when I hit puberty, they should hand it to me. Since the first day I've been looking for that map. At long lost. Here's your boyhood map. I'm hoping that I can find somebody who can help me, send me in the right direction.
When a culture doesn't provide formal rites of passage or initiations, people find their own, or they don't find them and never really find the traction of their life.
I wish that, I'd grown up with a male in the house other than myself. Someone to even out the numbers, someone to be a man, be a guy. So you can hang out and do guy stuff. So they can hang out and do girl stuff. I mean, that's what I wish.
One of the functions of initiation is to bring the young people fully into the community. And there, of course, is a longing for that. And it's in all the young people I see. It's in the colleges, but it's also in the street gangs.
There is nothing more satisfying than just knocking the crap out of some guy and looking down at him and just like, I did that. It made me forget about all those, bad times.
I was ready to get him out of the house. He had run away from home. Some of the things my son has done would warrant him getting kicked out in some households.
I guess I just kind of pushed it back to the back of my mind because I'm starting to feel it again. Like resounding disappointment in myself.
This opportunity to do the Boys to Men came up. And it's my last hope. And if it doesn't work for me, then the next step is Jeremy going with his dad.
Start to think about what your mission is. What do you want to do?
This is the time where Jeremy, you decide, what kind of father do I want to be? What kind of grandfather do I want to be? And you have an opportunity. The world is open to you. We're proud of you. You're a real leader. I want to thank you for letting me be your grandpa.
That's the kind of leader men want to follow. Been having a little boy. So proud of you.
You're a great young man. Well, you walked into some leadership this weekend too, man. You feel it? Yeah.
A lot of people go through a lifetime and never have anybody say, hey, I love you. And I want to say to you, big man, I love you. I love you for what you are.
I've been searching for help for some time because it's been quite a struggle. When he came back, my son openly communicated with me his feelings, which is the first time he'd ever done that. And I have to thank you for trying and for honoring me by trying. And you are the best. I love you.
My brother, he talks a lot. It's as if he had two mouths and one ear.
Jay's biggest challenge is patience. He needs more patience with himself and with his brother.
She knows all these websites. She can beat up people and that stuff. So, wow, what's up with you in movies? And yeah. Can you stop having your expectations so high? Because sometimes I don't feel like waking up in the morning because it's gonna be a hard day.
And I will stop putting such pressure on you.
and high expectations because you're perfect just the way you are. You are absolutely perfect just the way you are, Jane. An angel. An angel from God. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being my son.
Love you, Dad.
I love you, Jane. I'm going to be a dictator at home and pushing him in directions that I feel he should be going. We just shared tears together for a half hour on that rock, telling each other we love each other. And that's a bond that'll never be broken.
As the days fly past, anybody that's doing anything that recognizes and blesses the unique inherent qualities of young people probably is doing some good, you know, because the general cultural atmosphere is to deny that, and that creates an unnecessary movement. Young people don't feel welcome. Let me fill your cup with the promise of a man.
That's so powerful, Frederick.
Fretland Karski.
Forgive me. It's,
Hello. Welcome. We are so glad to have you.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to.
yeah, well,
Yeah. Very powerful.
Yeah, it's actually been, well, I guess it's been a good 15 plus years now that I've held the vision for this film, basically a long form documentary that would tell the stories of a lot of teen boys transitioning into mature masculinity, filming them over a period of time and seeing them as they go through different rites of passage, different initiation processes. So that's why the film ends with that plea for support. And it got put on the shelf due to other projects that came my way, but I still hold the intention of making that happen.
Yeah, very powerful, isn't it? Wow. Do you have more in your presentation that you'd like to
Yes.
continue with? Okay.
Yes, much more.
Okay, please go ahead.
So back to Arnold van Gennep, okay? In his book, Rites of Passage, he basically determined that there are three main stages of rites of passage. And again, this is reducing it to its most bottom line base level standard. So the first stage is typically called separation or descent. Now, what that means is the initiate has to be separated. And I guess I'll just go ahead and make it easy on myself and use male pronouns through the rest of this talk. He has to be separated from his normal life, his normal world. All of the people that he's typically surrounded with in his family, all of his belongings, all of his, sometimes even much of his clothes, much of the food that he eats, the time that he wakes up and goes to bed, all of it gets stripped away. And the purpose of this stripping away is most important because it takes us back to our deepest fundamentals as human beings. What are we in our essence? And it's not the clothes we wear, it's not the cell phone that we have in our hands, it's not the latest drink that we've heard is really wonderful. It's who we are in our essence. So that separation or descent is essential, stripping it away. And what gets stripped away also is even a sense of time, that chronos, that chronological time, where we are become really slaves to a large degree to the clock. And it's like, oh, okay, it's 7 o'clock. I got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. And most of our days are run, in a sense, by the clock. So that doesn't happen in Rite of Passage. So the second stage, the ordeal or threshold, sometimes also called the liminal stage, is typically it's precipitated by a deep physical challenge. Native American Vision Quest ceremony, for example, 4 days out in a very remote location by yourself. Typically, you would be in a circle, a sacred circle that you made out of stone or twigs that is no more than maybe 2-3 meters in diameter. And you basically sit there and don't eat or drink for 4 days. That's the way the Native Americans do it typically. So that's a physical trial of extreme proportions, yes. It's actually still common among some African peoples to put a spear in the hand of a teen boy and say, now you're going to go out and kill a lion. Talk about another extreme physical challenge. The people of Vanuatu, they dive off cliffs and they tie these ropes to their ankles. They're very, very, very carefully measured so that they should come within inches of basically hitting the ground before the rope goes taut and saves their lives. Talk about extreme physical challenge. So these are just some examples. This has gone on again throughout cultures across the planet for hundreds, thousands of years. So that's the second stage. And the purpose of the physical challenge is to bring about spiritual, mental, and emotional transformation. Okay, so that becomes the catalyst for how it is that we get a vision, in effect, for what our life is really at its fundament most about. And so the third stage is reintegration or homecoming. So you have to come back from this extreme physical challenge, and you are, in effect, bearing gifts. You have to sit down in sacred circles with elders, and you basically share your experience. And part of the purpose of the elders in that circle is to help you understand what happened to you, and what it means not only for your individual life, for how it points a marker, a way forward for the person that you are and that you need to become, but it also points to what unique gifts you as an individual have that the village, that the community needs. And so we begin to suss out how that new individual will fit in to the cobweb, to the puzzle, if you will, to the quilt of our society. So that's reintegration and homecoming. So now what does this look like for an average teen? Well, leaving, home, first of all, typically means separation. And why would anyone leave, right? You're taken care of, you're loved, you're fed, typically you're housed, you're clothed. And it's very interesting. I talked a couple of years ago to a woman in Charlotte, North Carolina. I gave a similar presentation out there. She told me at the end of my talk that she had recently kicked out her kids when they were both 18 years old, because she understood implicitly to some degree that if she didn't kick them out of the nest, they would never come into their own. They would never begin to understand who they are as individuals and learn to stand on their own 2 feet. So the culture, of course, does not support us in knowing either. And in fact, in this day and age, especially with the economy being what it is, and young men in such huge numbers joining the ranks of the unemployed, this separation from home, from parents, is becoming more and more delayed. And to the point where now it's a kind of a maxim in everyday conversation in the United States to say the 20s are the new teens, because so many young men in particular in their 20s are still living at home. They may well be unemployed, and they're not going through their own rite of passage into a new way of being as a young adult. They're stuck in that adolescent phase. So then they have to face death at some degree. Initiation must bring us into proximity with death. And it doesn't mean that we have to face our own literal death, but it does mean that we at least have to face our deepest fears around dying. And, you know, what teen in the right mind typically wants to face that? They don't, right? So oftentimes, you know, when they can become suspended adolescents, you know, living at home well into their 20s, the world outside becomes more and more fearful and becomes almost a symbol for death and dying. But if they don't face death, they won't build the necessary resiliency that they need as adult men to face upcoming real world challenges. And another aspect of this is they won't cherish life. They won't understand how precious and rare and wonderful life is and how it has to be nurtured and protected. So these are key lessons that come out of the ordeal. And an initiation requires, in a sense, the metaphorical death of the adolescent. So just as you have to die as you're a caterpillar to become a butterfly, you have to symbolically die to the child that's in you as an adolescent in order to be reborn as an adult. And in fact, you know, I actually, in the article that I sent you earlier in the New York Weekly, you know, some of your listeners might be interested in reading that, because I talk about how so many mass shooters, at least in the United States, are teen boys. They're teen males, typically late teens, but they are uninitiated men. And what's interesting to me about them doing this, even though it's totally dysfunctional, I believe that it has something to do with their genetic predisposition to want to be initiated. They want desperately to join the adult community of men and be recognized as a peer, as an equal. And so the way that they do this, because there are no culturally sanctioned ways anymore in our society to do this, they replicate what they see on TV and in the movies. So they pick up guns and they go out and they kill people. And then they often die themselves. And, you know, that in that way, it's a completely dysfunctional rite of passage, if you will, right? Because they are facing death, but they don't understand that, you know, without having the guidance of elders and these culturally sanctioned rites to support them, that they're acting out in ways that are completely contrary to what is fundamental about community survival and sustenance. So they have to die, in a sense, to this notion that every child has, every adolescent has, me, right? It's all about me. And they have to be reborn symbolically again into that sense of us. It's about all of us. We have to look out for each other. So what are the benefits of initiation? I've already touched on some of them. You have a deep sense of your place in the cosmos, that you understand the fundamental paradox of being human, which is that on one level, we are infinitely small and insignificant. And all it takes is one night alone on a hill, and I know this from experience, and looking up at the stars and going, my God, and experience the vastness of the universe and go, well, who the hell am I? What kind of importance do I have? That's part of it. But the other part of it is we are also, as individuals, infinitely powerful, potentially powerful. There are no limits to what each of us can do to manifest change in our own lives and in the world. So that's a fundamental product, typically, of initiation, having a grasp and understanding of that paradox. It's also important that you come away with it from initiation with understanding how you're part of the web of life, that we're all interconnected. And I love the term interdependence, which is to say, we're all connected, we're interdependent, yes, but we're independent, which is to say, we're still autonomous actors. You know, the fact that I'm picking up this pen right now is not something that somebody outside of me decided should happen. I just spontaneously did it. And so it is with all of the actions that I take in the world. I am an autonomous, independent actor, and yet everything that I do manifests changes in the world around me. And everything that all of you do who are listening to this manifests changes that also roll back and affect me and Gemma and everyone else on the planet. Typically, also, you know your mission or your life purpose. You have a sense of your gifts, or as I said earlier, your medicine, what it is that you have to offer the village, the community that is unique to you, that the community needs from you in order to gain sustenance, in order to thrive. You also have to have a sense of your physical and mental capacities. You know, this is really important, and especially for adolescents. They need to know that they can actually push themselves a lot further than they're typically allowed the opportunity to do, and that their mental capacities might have greater reach, much more expansive capacity in their heads than they previously thought possible. They also have to come back with a certain amount of EQ, emotional intelligence, because they are going to stare down the barrel of every dark emotion that they've ever faced going through a rite of passage. I mean, can you just fear alone, right? Can you imagine the fear that comes up from just those examples that I already stated about rites of passage, hunting a lion, jumping off a cliff? It could be the end of your life, right? So you have to learn how to look into the face of fear and go, okay, I see you, I feel it, and yet I'm going forward anyway. That's mature masculinity. Another aspect here is knowing service to community. You know, it completely mystifies me that here we are in 2023, and it still is somehow a mystery as to what creates happiness in life. For me, this is not a great mystery at all. The secret to being happy in life is really simply understanding what your gifts are, what your medicine is, and then giving it freely and lovingly to community, to the people around you, and seeing how they are impacted by it, how their lives are made richer, more meaningful, happier, more fulfilled. You know, these are things that we can all experience very easily. So that to me is an essential component of initiation. It builds into the process that understanding that service to the village, to the community, is an essential part of who we are. It's part of that us, us, us. And also, I would say that it's about self-empowerment, right? It's about getting a kickstart into your experiencing and fulfilling your greatest fullness as a human being. And it's interesting, you know, it makes me reflect on the famous Marianne Williamson quote, our greatest fear is not our inadequacies, it's our greatness. You know, that's something to really ponder. And if we have proper initiation and mentorship for all of our young people, they will understand that it's not our inadequacies we need to fear, it's our greatness, and we must step into that greatness. So most present day coming of age rituals really don't cut it. They don't fill this need. They don't teach these lessons anymore. You know, here in North America, we have quinceañera, which is common for 15-year-old girls of Latin descent to basically transition from girl into woman. We have Catholic confirmation. We have the Boy Scouts that do all kinds of rituals for boys, skill acquisition, great. But we don't have, and also there's of course Jewish bar mitzvah. And as a Jew myself, you know, when I was a teen, I was never bar mitzvahed because my parents were atheists and they weren't really interested in it. And Frankly, neither was I. But it's a beautiful ceremony. The problem with all of these is that to some degree, they've been co-opted by consumer culture. So that what happened to me and what happens to a lot of people who get bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah these days, the big question is not, how are you changed? How are you different as a man now that you weren't as a boy? What is it you've learned to give up? What is it that you've learned to acquire? None of these questions. What the question that comes back is, what'd you get, right? Did you get a car? Did you get a college scholarship? Did you get $10,000? That's all that anybody really talks about is the money, right? What gets spent. So these beautiful rituals, which historically had initiatory intent, have lost them and have been basically co-opted, I think, by capitalist consumer culture. So in short, it takes initiation to realize mature masculinity, in my view. Now, here's a quote from Robert Moore, who I mentioned earlier, and Doug Gillette from their book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. The mature masculine must be reclaimed by the modern world. Its virtual absence from technologically advanced societies has resulted in one of the more serious moral crises ever to face Western civilization. In our world, genocide is barely noticed. Rape is used as an instrument of both pathological male self-expression and ethnic war. Violence is becoming the preferred solution to interpersonal disputes. In all of this, we see evidence that mature masculinity in its fullness has all but been forgotten, and that boy psychology is prevalent. I think that quote is beautiful, and it summarizes as incredibly well a lot of what we're facing on the planet right now. We have suspended adolescence, men who are, well, I call them men, I mean, who are of the age of men, are still basically adolescents. They're still living out their boy psychology. They're still basically consumed by their appetites and their unacknowledged fears. That's what's driving them. They are not living in the us understanding of the world. They're living still in me. So I could go on and talk about some aspects of mature masculinity that I think are unique. Well, let me do this, and then I'll stop after that. How's that? I think there's 5 or 6 key things that can really define mature masculinity. And again, you know, these things, it always puzzles me in a way. I was reading an article today in the Washington Post, the newspaper, about how so many boys talk to adult men and they say, how do I become a man? And the adult men, of course, have no idea. Well, here's how you do it. 1, accountability and integrity. I think every man ultimately wants to live as a man of honor, to be able to hold your head high, to walk tall, and know that you're actually living in integrity, that what comes out of your mouth is actually going to be fulfilled, that you'll actually do what you say. You're going to walk your talk, right? And you'll be accountable for it. So if you actually commit to doing something, you make an agreement to do something, and you don't follow through on it, you'll be accountable for that agreement. I screwed up. Here's what I did that was wrong, that took me away from that, and I'm going to make it up to you. Can you imagine, just for a moment, I mean, how our governments would function so much more effectively if they simply were accountable, and the people who are our politicians, our so-called leaders, actually had integrity, and actually what came out of their mouths was consistent and congruent with what they did? We'd have a very different world. A second thing is EQ. I already mentioned this, but especially for men, we've got to learn how not to fear and repress our emotions, but to identify them and utilize them. They can actually provide all kinds of rivers of energy and power for us to get behind and then to use to fulfill our missions in the world, to fulfill what our purpose is. Shadows, that's another key ingredient. Every one of us on the planet has a dark side, and we all have a natural tendency to hide, repress, and deny that dark side. And especially with men, it makes us dangerous if we're not fully aware of them. We can be hurting others and ourselves by acting out of these shadows. And that's a term that comes directly from Carl Jung. And you can read up, through Jung's work to learn more about that. But we have to be brought face to face with all of that darkness and stop pretending. Stop pretending that, well, for a lot of men, for example, I'm inclined to say most men, we have a killer inside of us. And actually, it can be a very good thing that we have that killer inside of us, because that killer might have to do very important, very powerful service to our families and to our villages and our communities at some point, if that's what's required. But if we're not conscious of that killer, it'll act out in all kinds of sideways, dysfunctional ways, like I said earlier, about picking up guns and indiscriminately murdering innocent civilians, brothers and sisters that we have in this world. So that's fundamental. And as men, we have to learn to live cooperatively and not just competitively. The culture teaches us as men that we have to compete with each other. We have to compete for jobs and resources. We have to compete for women. We have to compete for all kinds of things. And we cannot cooperate with each other in order to fulfill those needs that we have. Well, this is a very dangerous lie that's been taught us. And obviously it's congruent with the whole sort of capitalist ethos that governs the world culture right now. But we have to be able to learn to live cooperatively, and rites of passage and mentorship can help us do that. Mission or life purpose. Everybody has one. They just need to be supported in finding it. And typically, initiation is what helps us find it. And I tell you, even at my age, I still ask myself regularly, am I really living my mission by doing this? And in a sense, it can become like a sailor guiding, by seeing the Southern Cross, right? You always know where the Southern Cross is in the sky, or in the Northern Hemisphere. You always know where the North Star is in the sky. And then you can orient from that, right? Well, that's a metaphor for how our mission or life purpose has to be in service to us, to guide us through our day-to-day decision-making, to keep us on track. And lastly, I think, and I've touched on this, we need to understand that happiness is found in service, not in consumption. So those are the key factors, really 5, 6 factors that for me define mature masculinity. And if we can live up to those, then I think it's fair to qualify ourselves, not as a finished product, because we're all learning all the time, and I will be, I guarantee you, until my final breath, but to at least call ourselves adult men, and to walk with pride and dignity on this planet, and to take real pride in our masculinity. I think that's really essential. So let me stop there.
Wow, let me see if I can get this back to, there we are. That's a great presentation. Thank you so much, Frederick, and really gives us an insight into, the importance of this. So now, because I know you still got so much more to say. I mean, we can go over time, but so I'll leave that totally in your hands. So let's look at solutions. So we're hearing about the importance of initiation. And, there's plenty of women watching this as well as men, women raising boys alone and with fathers. So where do we find solutions?
Well, one place to go is that organization that I co-founded called Youth Passageways. So go to the website, and my idea, my starting vision for the whole organization and website was that somebody could type in something as simple as their zip code, the term that we use in the US, to describe where it is they're living, and then they would get a printout of all of the organizations that are doing mentorship and rites of passage work with who? With boys, with girls, with both, with whoever, and at what ages, etc. So the website is a great place to start. It's a clearinghouse of information for people all over the world. But it's also important to recognize too that you don't have to go through a culturally sanctioned and created rite of passage in a sense, because life itself will bring us through rites of passage, right? So just like when I was 9 years old and my father suddenly died, I was going through a rite of passage out of childhood into adolescence. Unfortunately, there were no elders there to explain to me that this is what's happening to you, and to say to me, basically, Freddie, you're too young for this, but nonetheless, here it is. And if you're feeling fear, shock, pain, anger, grief, all of it is welcome, it's normal, and I'm going to stand by your side until you work through all of those feelings, until you get actually a gift out of this tremendous horror, until you begin to understand what it is that this message of your dad dying is delivering to you about the meaning of your life. Well, needless to say, here I am right now doing it, right?
Yes, you are. Amazing. So I'd really like to talk to mothers, because often as mothers, I'll say we have reluctance to fully be able to let go of our sons, and that part one of the three parts that you said was vitally important of the initiation process, the separation. So now walk us through, please. Walk us through, speak to us as women. Do we totally let go? Do we check in now and then? What do we do? We wait for them to come back to us. I'm in the process of this in the moment with my boys now, 21 and 24, and they're both off doing their thing. And I try to allow it, I maybe just send a message every now and then maybe it's been a couple of weeks and one hasn't checked in, and I'm like, don't do it. Like, what's the happy medium?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to recognize that when the kids leave home, that's a rite of passage for parents. So that's something where, in a sense, symbolically, you have to die to that role of 24/7 motherhood, right? And be reborn into some new relation, into some new role, right? With your own sons. And yes, it's not easy to define what that is. And yes, it can take a long time. And we don't have culturally sanctioned support for parents like yourself to do that. So it makes it all the harder. So I do want to give an even more direct answer to your question, but I just want to detour for a second and say, there's a colleague friend of mine who basically has done teen initiation work for years. And he realized that when the boys come home, if their parents have no understanding of what's been happening to the boys during this process, they won't be able to receive them in ways that'll be nurturing and will support their further growth. So he decided, I need to do a parallel ritual with the parents, so that they can understand they're going through their own rite of passage, and that they can begin to think through and feel their way through the new relationships with their own offspring. That's vitally important. So what do you do? Well, I think you already, in a sense, answered your own question to some degree by what you were saying, which is to back off, I think, to some degree, right? To make it clear to them that you're there and that you will love them forever to the top of and bottom of your whole being, and that they will need to come more and more back to you with their needs. and that you will be coming less and less forward to them offering. So I think that's really important, because there's a lot of good things that happen in that. One is that gives them autonomy and power, right? It leaves it up to them. It's like, and you know what? There's a lot of boys who will come back and do come back and need to come back and get that mother's love, because there is nothing to replace it, nothing in this world. So, and that's an important point too, by the way. I mean, your kids are a little bit old now, but teenage boys still need to be hugged and cuddled and kissed. And even though most of them will push away, go, yeah, I don't want any of that, they, at least if you're making the attempt, somewhere deep in their heart, they know it and they love it. Okay. So, but when they're adult men, they have to come back to you. That has to be their choice for that.
Yeah, I'm lucky that my boys are always happy to give me lots of hugs. So that's great. So that's a really important piece for other mothers, as hard as it is to be aware of when we want the best for our boys to grow into men, is to give them that space and to make their mistakes. What if they come back and ask to lend some money?
Well,
say no.
I wish I had, like, across the board answers that would work, but I don't. So every circumstance is different, but the key thing, I think, too, that has to happen with young men is they have to understand the costs on each side of a decision. The costs. Okay. So if they come back and they want to borrow money, you could say, well, okay, this is the 10th time now in the last 2 years you've been back. And if I give you this money, I want to exact something in return. And you have to think through what that might be. Maybe it's a repayment plan, or maybe it's taking out some service that I want you to be around the house doing some fixing of the gutters and doing lawn mowing and doing other chores around the house. You have to sort of work that out, but it's really important that that you always, in a sense, point out the pros and cons of each side of a given decision. Okay, so, and you could say, well, I could give you this money, but look at it this way, young man, you might feel guilty, even more guilty, for taking money from me than you already do. Do you want to feel more guilt? Is that something you want to take on and experience in your life? Maybe not. In fact, maybe you want to start freeing yourself from this guilt. Okay? And again, you have to know your own kids, and then you can point out both sides of that equation best for them.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, I don't have an issue with it. Both mine only ever asked once. And, what you were saying about feeling the weight of not so much guilt, but feeling that weight of having a debt to someone is not pleasant. So I allowed him to feel that. He did have a payment plan, which he stuck to, and all sorted. But I don't think he'll ever ask again, just because it's not a pleasant position to be in. And I'd rather that he did it with me than with the bank. And if he ever does need a bank loan, he'll really seriously consider, that feeling of debt, because it's not freeing at all, right? So, yeah, great points. I loved also what you said about, if we don't give, men initiations, the course of life will initiate them.
Yes.
Yes. So, the hero's journey there. So, is it important for us as parents to pay to send our children away to go to these weekends or week courses, or do we just allow life to initiate them?
Well, it depends, again, on the circumstances. But I talk about in my book how we can typically tell when it's a young person's time by when they start acting out. Okay, so all of a sudden, if Johnny goes from getting straight A's to flunking a lot of his courses, something is going wrong. Or Susie is all of a sudden taking money out of mom's purse, whereas before she was completely honorable. She would never do something like that. Or it could be, of course, experimentation with drugs and sex for the first time. So typically those are the markers that says now is the time. Now is the time. That young person is unconsciously asking, in effect, for initiation. So if we read the cues right, then hopefully we can actually send our young people off to be initiated by the men at that time. But if we don't read the cues right, then yes, life is going to teach them the lessons regardless. But what's unfortunate is that without the support of elders, they may not tease out the meaning of those lessons, those hard lessons, right? And that is a universal problem almost in our society today. Like I said, in my example, none of my dad's younger brother, none of his colleagues, none of the men in our neighborhood, nobody came to me and offered their mentorship to teach me how to become the man I want to be by working through all of my emotions around my dad's death. Nobody. So we need to be alert to recognize those opportunities when they arise. And they are opportunities, even though they come in the form of a very, very serious challenge, right? A kid could have a terminal illness all of a sudden, right? And then it's like, okay, we have to be there and say, look, you didn't ask for this, but here it is. And the universe is now asking you to grow up really quickly. And I'm going to support you in that transition.
Yeah, very powerful. Now, you touched on, addictions. Now, let's say a typical teenager will experiment with alcohol, with marijuana and other drugs. So what's the happy medium there? When is it called acting out and it needs attention as opposed to experimenting and finding his own way?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say that it depends on the behaviors that result from the use of the alcohol or the marijuana or whatever. So, let's get real. I mean, so marijuana can typically make you a couch potato. So suddenly, Johnny, again, instead of like being up and active and going into his sports classes and doing all his chores and whatever, is now, sitting on the couch, watching movies all day. That tells us something, right? So, but again, there are no blanket rules here. You have to basically sit down and have long, in-depth conversations with your kids, and say, something like, look, when I was a kid, I experimented with alcohol and drugs of all kinds. I certainly did. So I'm not going to be a hypocrite here and say, don't do it. I am not going to do that. It's a natural, logical thing for you to have curiosity and want to explore. Great. But we need to talk about what are the guidelines? What's going to keep you safe during this process of exploration? And then work out agreements. You work out agreements, so it's like, okay, well, you'll be home every night by 1 a.m. You won't drive the car when you're drunk. Get very, very specific, because boys love contract in black and white. They like to know exactly what they're agreeing to.
Is that even from their mothers?
Yes. Yeah.
Great to know. Yeah. So what else needs to be said around, because I can't remember what time we started. I think we started about just over an hour ago. I know you've got a lot to say and you can go over, but what else do we need to talk about, Frederick?
Well, I don't know about need to talk about, but I will say that, in my notes, I had actually prepared talking a little bit about what defines good mentorship. Because, that's something that we typically think we know, but we don't really know, in my experience. So, so that's one thing, you know, the qualities of what defines a good mentor and what are the best practices of mentorship. Well, in fact, let me just do it because it won't take long and I can read it right out of my book.
Right.
I mean, it's one of the appendices in my book, the 10 best practices of mentorship. So the first one, observe the 80-20 rule. Mentees speak 80% of the time, mentors 20%. So that's important to remember because young people, they feel like they've spent their whole lives listening to us and they want to be heard. So it's really important as mentors that we let them speak. We give the floor to them. So 80% of the time we should be listening and asking questions. How did that make you feel? What did you do then? You know, etc. Asking questions so they talk more and more and more. So that's really important. The second one is related, don't give advice, right? Don't tell young people what to do. They've been told what to do all their lives. What they want to have instead is your own personal experiences that were similar and how you worked your way through them. And then if you say, and then in your 20%, if you want to point out, well, okay, yes, you could go off and marry this girl that you've now impregnated. Or, you know, so let's look at the options, the pros and cons. So what are the pros and cons of you marrying her? What are the pros and cons of you not marrying her? Just look them, so it's all out on the table and let them decide, because ultimately they have to decide, right? If we're gonna, well, allow them is not the word, but we want them to be self-standing, autonomous individuals, right? A third thing, be empathetic, not sympathetic. Okay? Because so you have to listen compassionately. And pity is completely counterproductive. If they feel like you're pitying them, they'll be like, fuck you. I have no interest in this. But if you're empathetic and you're just open-hearted listening, that's great.
Because Frederick, is that because we don't want them to feel like a victim, because a victim is powerless and cannot step into his own ownership of the situation? So really important that we distinguish between the empathy and the sympathy, because victims get sympathy, right?
Yes, exactly. And we want them to be empowered, right? We want them to start to experience themselves as equals. And so, and I'm kind of working to that point, but since I'm already there, I'll say that, you know, mentorship relationship is not a hierarchical relationship. We have to meet these young people as equals and respect them as equals. And it doesn't even matter what their age is. Even if they're 15, we have to treat them like fellow adults at that time, because they will know from all of our unconscious messaging whether we're treating them as equals or not. And they do not want to be condescended to, right? You know this. So, well, this is actually the fifth point here. In order for the relationship to succeed and become sustainable, mentors must learn, grow, or gain something too from the relationship, right? So if you as a mentor are thinking, I'm just going to give away, you know, it's all altruism, you know, I'm doing a service, you know, to this boy, fuck you, don't do it. Don't do it, because you will be a terrible mentor. But if you're going into the relationship thinking, you know what, I'm going to be mentored too by this boy, and he's going to teach me something that I don't yet know or understand about my life. And it could be something as simple as, you know, I'm an older man and this young person has so much energy and vitality. I love it. I love soaking up that energy and vitality because that gives me further energy and vitality for my life. So you have to learn, grow, or gain something from the relationship. Another point that Michael Mead mentioned this at the end of the video clip, you have to acknowledge and bless. that is arguably the most important thing that we can do as mentors. Because our society, we don't have any more blessing that goes on, really, in society, where we actually say to each other, and I talked about this at the beginning, right? If at Valentine's Day, we say, honey, I love you, and here's why, and be very specific. The fact that you did this, you do this on a regular basis, and I see it, and I appreciate it. It warms my heart when you do that. It makes me feel safe and nurtured, whatever. So we need to do that with our young boys especially. So we need to call out and say to them, you know, Tommy, I saw you helping your little sister with her homework. I just want to acknowledge that. And I really honor you for that, because that's what an adult man does. He sees the need that other people have, and he steps up and he fills the need. Bless you for that. I love you and honor you for that. So that's so important. We have to model accountability. If we want our mentees to be accountable, we damn well better be accountable. So we have to show up. We can't like blow them off, right? That's really important, because young people learn by watching us. They watch what we do, less what we say, more what we do, right? And they are looking for people who are living in integrity, who actually walk their talk. And so if he says he's going to be there at 10 o'clock, he better be there at 10 o'clock, because I'm watching him, right? So we better show up and we better be accountable. You know, another way that we can honor mentees as mentors is asking them for input on the challenges that we have. Because again, that underscores that equal relationship, right? So, you know, I do this all the time too with the men that I mentor. You know, I'll tell them very frankly and transparently about the challenges that I'm having. And then I solicit and listen to their input, you know, so that's really valuable. So when the time is right, arguably the greatest blessing we can give a mentee is severing the relationship when the time is right. Because these things should not drag on indefinitely. And it's important that a one-to-one relationship, that a young man understand that any other given man only has so much he can teach him. And he has to go to other men to learn. So typically when I work with my mentees, I say, you know, I'll give you about up to a 3-year period, and we'll see where things stand at the end of those 3 years. And if I feel like I still have more to offer, then we can re-up, and maybe I'll do it for an additional 3 years, but maybe not. I may say, you know what? I've given you everything I got. It's time for you to find somebody else. And then this is the last thing, and it's on mentees. They need to learn how to, in effect, acknowledge and bless the mentors. So if we can teach them that skill, then they will be acknowledging and blessing people throughout the remainder of their lives, right? But it's important really for them to really stop, pause, and ponder what a powerful impact, hopefully, the mentors have made in their lives, and to thank them for it, and to be, again, very specific about what they've learned, what lessons they're taking away, and not general. You know, that doesn't work. We have to be very specific. So that's it. Those are the 10 best mentorship practices.
Yeah, so powerful. Now, Frederick, we've spoken a lot about what parents can do for boys. What about a man who's watching this and he is an adult already, might be a young adult, might be older adult? What would you say to him if he realizes that he hasn't really, you know, he's seeking more of a initiation mentorship path?
Well, yeah, there's all kinds of equivalencies that are listed on the Youth Passageway site that are designed for youth that exist for adults. So the Mankind Project is certainly one of them, and we're one of the world leaders in doing this work. But there are others. There's lots of men's growth organizations out there. So that's certainly one thing you can do. And I recommend that all the time to men, you know. But in addition to that, I also recommend getting in men's support circles, because I think it's really essential for men to learn to be able to sit cooperatively, not competitively, with men in a circle and open our hearts and be vulnerable and share our challenges. And the fact of the matter is, you know, I've been in those circles now for 27 years, and I still love and adore them. And I miss the men if I don't see them once a week. And I have learned about myself that sometimes simply just showing up and speaking my challenges and speaking my fears around those challenges releases them. And it's never, ever failed in 27 years that I don't walk away from these circles after 3 hours of being with my brothers where I feel 10 pounds lighter. And I feel real joy no matter what circumstances I might have walked into the meeting with.
Yeah.
So those are some key things.
Yeah, so good. Well, I think we've done about 90 minutes. Is there anything that we need to touch on before we start wrapping up, Frederick?
I don't think so, really. I mean, it's, you know, as you can tell, I can talk about this stuff forever, but I think that those are a lot of the main points. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more detail in my book. And actually, if your listeners are interested, I really recommend the audio book, because having now spent the last 15 years trying to make this film, I have interviews with over 25 of the world's greatest, deepest thinkers on all of these subjects of rites of passage and mentorship. And you can hear their actual voices in the audio book. So it's like an audio documentary. So you hear Michael Meade telling a story, the half boy story while he's drumming. It's just beautiful. And so all of these voices are all woven in with my voice in the audio book.
Wow. And what's up next for Warrior Films?
Well, I mean, I'm still consumed with rites of passage, but right now I'm focused on the final rite of passage, from eldership into death. And it's actually 3 days ago was the 7th anniversary of my late wife dying. And before she died, it was like 12 days before she died, we did a life honoring celebration for her. And my intention is to try to plant a meme, a cultural meme, so that we can infect the entire general dominant culture, so that hopefully when we all recognize that our loved ones are dying, that we don't wait until they're dead before we gather and talk about how wonderful they were. We do it before they die, and we say it to their face. And we do it in a sacred, ceremonial way. And so they can begin to understand the ripples of positive impact that they've made in their lives. And they can see it, and they can feel it, and they can touch it. And it's not only powerful for them as individuals, but it's powerful for the community. It builds a whole community. So it's just one ritual, but I'm making a film about all of the different ways that people are doing this, hopefully around the globe.
Oh, sounds amazing. And when is that due to be?
I wish I knew.
Because I was going to say, I'd love to have you back then, and you know, we can take a look at the film and the making and everything. Wow, this has been such an incredible episode. Thank you, Frederick. So important, this understanding the rites of initiation, the rites of passage for boys into men. Please let us know where people can find you. We'll drop all the links below.
Yeah, well, the simplest thing is to just go to warriorfilms.org, our website, and just sign up. You know, give us your name and email address. I send out newsletters about once a month, and typically I highlight rites of passage that are happening around the world right now. The last 3 newsletters, we've been talking about ones that are going on in the United States, some that are happening in Africa, some in Asia. Anyway, that's just some of what it is I share. It's always good news. And I also like to inject as much humor in there as I can too.
So good. And to wrap up with, what's the one most important thing that a parent can do today for their boys?
Let them know that they're not alone. You know, boys tend to feel like they're somehow alone and wrong with all of their thinking about all of their fears and all of their inadequacies, which they seize on, right? And they think that they're unique somehow in having this. And in fact, that's what makes them universal, because everyone has these fears. Everyone has inadequacies. And so they need to understand that they're just not alone. They're like every other boy out there. And if they can experience that in some way through a rite of passage, or at least through some kind of boys support circle, then they can know it firsthand. It won't just be words, they'll know it.
Yeah, it's so good. Wow, thank you so much, Frederick, once again. It's been an amazing episode, and it's just added on and given more depth to, you know, our previous conversation. So very appreciative, and I'll get this up on YouTube now. So thank you. And thank you to everyone for watching. If you could like, share, subscribe, get Frederick's message out there, and I'll be back in a few days with another episode of Manspeak, sorry. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you. Stay on if you like. Whoops. Pause.